but they are startling. From the dawn of human history until 1900, the world economy grew to $600 billion in global output. Think about that. In 1900, the total world economy was $600 billion. Today, it grows by this amount every 2 years. More than $3 trillion moves through currency markets. That's just currency markets every day. That's just a fraction of the money that's moving around. There's $2 trillion in interbank transfers. There's all kinds of other money moving around. Remember how big a trillion was? Average daily trading volume on the New York Stock Exchange, it was 3 million shares a day in 1960. Now, depending on how you count, it's a lot more than 3 billion today, but the market has morphed and they bought other exchanges. I was trying to kind of make it be apples to apples a little bit in the comparison. But the point is, it's more than a 1,000-fold increase in trading activity in basically a generation. Annual turnover, again, I'm not going to bore you with those statistics. It's frenetic. And if you look at these so-called hockey sticks, those of you who know venture capital know that it's very fond of what are called hockey stick financial projections. What does that mean? The one on the right, the last one, is the way venture capitalists make money. They invest in companies that kind of go like this, and then when the successful ones hit, they, like Google, they just go through the stratosphere. All those other hockey sticks ain't so good. You know, CO2 in the atmosphere, population, New York Stock Exchange trading. Well, processing speed, we can debate whether that's good or bad. It's not bad in itself, of course. So how does this impact food? Forget the first two things on there where all the words are. Just look at the green. The vast majority of food enterprises dedicated to sustainable local food systems do not qualify for either philanthropy or venture capital. This is a design problem. The problems we face with respect to soil fertility, biodiversity, and food quality are not primarily problems of technology. They are problems of finance. In a financial system organized to optimize the efficient use of capital, we should not be surprised to end up with cheap food, millions of acres of GMO corn, a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, and obesity epidemics side by side with persistent hunger. And then I say one more slide on the design problem. Capital markets were designed to maximize economic growth, consumption, and liquidity during an epoch when corporations were small, the world was big, and principles of ecology were not understood. Wealth now, philanthropy later made sense when capital was scarce and resources were abundant, and we had yet to see the Earth rising over the moon. Those are kind of bombastic, large statements, but I actually think they're needed for us to reconnoiter where we are. Wealth now, philanthropy later is my shorthand for basically industrial finance in the 20th century. What does that mean? It was robber baron finance. It was get, amass, create. There's no such thing as a company that's too big. There's no such thing as too much personal wealth. And after we create all that wealth, we'll figure out how to give some away and how to kind of clean up the messes and whatever. And that's the way to solve problems. Keep creating more wealth, drive it, progress forward by economic growth and entrepreneurship, whatever. Again, no such thing as too much. And then whatever's left over, we'll use philanthropy to kind of clean the problem up. And that is another thing, depending on how far we get into the discussion when I stop, that is behind the slow money idea that I think that philanthropy in the 21st century has to be basically a new form of investment. Not this idea that we'll take the philanthropic dregs and give them to a few nonprofits to try to clean up the mess. I'm not sure why this Gary Snyder quote is right here, but it's a good quote. Our distance from the source of our food allows us to be superficially more comfortable and distinctly more ignorant. Our stance in regard to food is a daily manifestation of our economics and ecology. And then this last sentence is the zinger. Food is the field in which we daily explore our harming of the world. So if you think about food, in this case, you put other things in there as being on this boundary between philanthropy and investing and forcing us to ask questions about how industrial finance is no longer responding to the actual situation on the planet. And then you look at those values that are down below, and we could talk about each one of them a lot. Ecology, economy, agrarian, industrial, cyclical, linear, places, markets. Of all of them on there, that's the one that gets me the most. All of our attention is on markets, and then we wonder why our places are degraded. It's not too much of a mystery. But this is all part of what Paul Hawken called the emergence of restorative economics, which is as good a phrase. I like it much better than sustainability. The idea that we need to restore. We're no longer about just seeing if we can keep going on the path we're on. We cannot keep going on the path we're on. I mean, we can for a while, and then some other form of collapse will follow the financial collapse. There are many people who are watching the food system right now who believe the food system is poised for exactly the same kind of collapse that we've just had in credit markets. And you could, I think, I see nodding heads already. If I make the statement that GMOs are basically the derivatives of the food system, we could have that discussion. I mean, this is scientific design to maximize yield and supposedly reduce risk, which is exactly what we just went through in credit derivatives. That's why everyone bought it. They thought they were getting something for nothing, getting lower risk and higher yield. Well, that sounded pretty good. And the same thing is happening with GMOs, basically. It's maybe not exactly the same, but it's close enough. I don't really need to even do this slide in this crowd, but this is more for financiers when you have to say, well, why does soil fertility matter? And I played with the idea of sub-economics as opposed to Schumacher's meta-economics. But I'm just going to say them here without any discussion. Billions of microscopic organisms live in a handful of topsoil, and most species remain unidentified. Maybe everybody doesn't know that part. Aristotle recognized the centrality of humus in plant nutrition. Darwin spent the last years of his life studying the role of earthworms in soil formation. That is not an exaggeration. He literally spent the last years of his life doing nothing but studying earthworms on his land in England and writing down their behavior. Soil is the most underappreciated, least valued, yet essential natural resource. That's a book last year written by a geologist at the University of Washington. World Watch calls soil erosion, quote, the quiet crisis of the 21st century, unquote. And last but not least, a hopeful note. Emerging science indicates a strong relationship between soil fertility and carbon sequestration, where you're going to see a ton of science on this in the next decade. I mean, I think there's going to be there is already starting to be a lot of research and a lot of entrepreneurial activity looking at soil amendments and other ways of building soil organic matter and trying to monetize that to get carbon payments for sequestering carbon in the soil. It's very hopeful, actually. It's a big topic. I don't know if you want to talk about it later. And all of these things lead us to some big questions about how this all fits together. If we cannot create wealth without degrading the soil, how can we, no matter how clean our machines, hope to survive? And that's in there because people are starting to get the idea of carbon in the atmosphere and climate change, and that, thanks to Al Gore and other things, that is now embedded in everyone's consciousness. But no one has really paid any attention to soil fertility yet, which is tied to water use and toxics and a whole bunch of other things. And then the second one is a little bit addressed at the slow food. How many people here belong to slow food? Few. So this is a little bit addressed to us, because I'm part of slow food, and would just have a footnote here, maybe for later discussion, that the slow food movement in the United States is a pale shadow of what it is in Europe and in other countries, and hasn't quite been able to deliver on the political, cultural, biological parts of the mission yet here. But I would say, how can we enjoy slow food while our money is zooming around the planet investing in companies of the monoculture? So you kind of know what that means. Trying to summarize all this in a few words, again, tough assignment, but look at this. This is a little bit of a poem. And the words on the left are the value system of the current industrial system that we wish to, let's say, balance with the values on the right. So circulation versus percolation, monoculture versus diversity, transaction versus relationship, and profitability versus fertility. And there's a lot to think about there. The only one I'll highlight is monoculture versus diversity, and just say if there's probably one principle that we were trying to, let's say, hit people in finance over the head with, it would be that what they've been calling diversification isn't real. If it doesn't have biological and cultural diversity under it,